Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to yet another webinar by Internet Vikings. Hello. I could see from the statistics of the registrant, we have a really international crowd today with registrants from the United States dominating, quite a few people from all over Europe, Germany, United Kingdom, Poland, France. Let's see who is already here. Hello, Dan from London. Anyone else is here? We'll just wait a few minutes for everybody together before we start. I can see that one of our speakers, Rickard, is already here. We're still waiting for Stefan. Hello, Stefan. We'll just give a few moments. Hello from Malta, and another one from Malta. Welcome, guys. Welcome. The United States, Jason, hello. Thank you for coming. Amsterdam, London. Great. People are gathering. Don't be shy. Introduce yourself. Send us where you're located at. Stefan, are you joining us from Stockholm? How is it back there?
Yes, that's very true. Joining in from Stockholm. Yes, it's sunny and very warm at the moment, so I would not complain. As some of you know, Sweden is not the warmest country in the world, but currently it's great weather. So we're very happy for that.
That's amazing. I can see a few more people from Netherlands, United States, Sweden, Gothenburg, Florida. Hello. And Rickard, you're in Malta.
Absolutely. Visiting this week, so really happy to be here.
Fantastic. Yes, the weather in Malta not as great as Sweden by Maltese standards, obviously. Ireland, Hungary, Brighton, United Kingdom. Fantastic. Stockholm, 20 degrees here. Somebody's confirming that it's nice, warm, and sunny. Another one from Sweden. Hello, and more people are typing. Fantastic. Everybody's Belgrade, Serbia. Everybody's very active and very punctual today. It's a very important topic we'll be discussing, cybersecurity. Nobody wants to miss any important information. I'll give it another half a minute and then we will join in. Perfect. Let's start with a presentation. Then we prepared a lot of data for you. It's better you see it on the screen. Good day, Taylor, to you too. Where are you from, Taylor? Perfect. So probably we're going to start with introducing the speakers. Yes, today we have Stefan Thelberg, the founder and CEO of Home Security and Stay Secure. Very warm welcome, Stefan. Would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Thank you, Julia. Yeah, I'll do the very brief version introduction of myself. So I've been in the industry, the IT industry and cybersecurity industry for around 25 years now. So I hope I have a few things to contribute with. Maybe I'll be able to provide a few good takeaways for today's webinar.
Thank you so much, Stefan. I'm sure you will be able to. And of course, we have our very own Rickard, the founder and CEO of Internet Vikings. A warm welcome, Rickard.
Thank you. And I'm really happy to be here. Also really happy to have Stefan with us. Talk a bit because we do one part of the security side, and also really good to hear home security and all the security scannings and all a company that literally finds all the issues to hear and see that side of the cybersecurity.
Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. It's an important topic. There's a lot of information to share today, so I will not waste any more of the viewers' times and I will jump to the agenda straight away. There's a lot to discuss today. Yes, so we're going to start with sharing some generic information about cybersecurity and all the major cyber threats. The next one, I will hope I'll pronounce it correctly. We're going to talk about PCI DSS version 4. I'm excited to hear what that is because I have very little knowledge about that. Of course, we're going to talk about the EU regulations, DDoS attacks, ransomware, some of the hottest cybersecurity threats these days, and the best cybersecurity strategies and prevention techniques. So there is no question why we're here today and why this topic is important and why everybody should listen to it, because cybersecurity threats are growing by day every year, again and again. For example, I've stack up some data. There was an increase of 79% in DDoS attacks in 2022, and the numbers keep growing in 2023. And what is the worst part? Their scale is growing. So it's not only numbers, they're becoming more volumetric, so more terabyte strong attacks. So far, there have been nearly 500,000 registered ransomware attacks in 2022, and in early 2023, these numbers nearly doubled, with US being the most targeted country across various industries. For us, of course, in Internet Vikings, the United States is the major market we are targeting as a supplier, and it's very important for us that our clients stay safe, vigilant, and aware of what's going on. In June 2022, nearly 25% of gambling sites were hit with DDoS attacks, according to the reports. That is the reason why we're here, because the online casinos and sports betting operators, they need to be protected, and they need to stay vigilant and be aware of what threats are there and how to strategize and prepare for them. In the past 5 years, some of the most renowned industry companies were hit with either DDoS attacks or with ransomware, leading to various misfortunate outcomes. A few of them had major data breaches resulting in data threat, and as well some of their websites were down for days, resulting in major monetary loss. For example, there are some statistics that if a company generates around 1.2 billion US dollars revenue, when they are under DDoS attack, it would cost them around 150,000 US dollars per hour being under the DDoS attack. So imagine how much they could losing half a day or an entire day. Some of the major reasons why online casinos and online sports betting operators and platforms are being hit so much, because the industry keeps growing, both geographically and in revenue matters. So they're being hit more and more. That's a little bit statistics of information just to point out how important today's topic is, and the concerns will continue to grow potentially in the future. So I'm handing the mic to Rickard to start the main information, the main presentation, and I will be back for the Q&A session, guys. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, and also really looking forward, especially to the upcoming regulatory changes going on. And if we continue to the generic information, like obviously we have an issue. That's why you've all joined this webinar. It's not that we are talking about something that might happen in the future, something potential, a threat that, like maybe 20 years ago, when me and Stefan started to work in this industry, there were a lot of, yes, it might happen in the future. It's going on. If we look at from the middle, the ransomware, it's growing. We will have some numbers later on, but it is a growing topic, and we will dive more into that. Another thing that like me and Stefan have been discussing prior to this webinar is like the cloud misconfiguration. Before, like 20 years ago, you needed literally to take a cable and wrongly connect it into a switch, into a router, physically connect it. And then you had a misconfiguration in your network. Today, when everything is cloud-based, it's so easy to, in the different cloud platforms, to configure and also misconfigure your network, your firewalls, your IDS, your IPS. And if someone do that at 7 Friday evening, it's not noticed until Monday morning, maybe on the Wednesday. But the cloud misconfiguration is something that we see because it's so easy to actually misconfigure something. And then also regarding how to protect our employees. We as a we had a 1.5 hour InfoSec education seminar today, going through over and over again. This is issues. This is what we can do. If something happens, this is what we need to do to do the training around it, and to always be top of mind in terms of security threats, what might happen, because it is when you are stressed, it is when you're tired, that's when the hacker will, if you are really targeted, that's when the hacker will hit against you. Not on a Monday morning or a Tuesday morning when you're fresh, you know what you're doing. So that's the focus. So really looking forward, and I will then hand over to Stefan to talk a bit more on the PCI DSS v4.
Yes, thank you, Rickard. So just as Rickard now mentioned, obviously we're facing new threats, maybe threats that we could not even imagine existed just some 5, 10, and if you go further back, 15, 20 years ago. Introduction of cloud, as Rickard mentioned, which also introduces a number of new threats and risks. One of the things that I would like to highlight today and briefly talk about is the introduction and the upgrade of the previous version, PCI DSS version 3. So as some of you might be aware of, there is an industry organization called the Payment Card Industry, PCI, and they work intensively with specifically with cybersecurity. This has been a very big topic, obviously, for the payment card industry for a number of years. And it just continues, obviously, with all the new threats that we're facing, like phishing attacks and ransomware attacks, etc. Something that we notice when we talk to the industry, not least the industry and the people in the industry that we talk with today, is that there is a lack of knowledge of this introduction of the new version 4, and what that actually means from a cybersecurity perspective, what kind of responsibilities that comes with that. So version 3 will be retired. What version 4 is about is that it will facilitate more efficient ways to combat new threats. Obviously, as we've been talking about, there's a constantly shifting landscape, and not least cloud infrastructure, etc., is exposing us to new threats. PCI version 4 is also introducing a lot of new requirements. There's actually quite a big number of new requirements, as many as 63 new requirements about how you should work with cybersecurity threats. And if you don't comply with these regulations, that could obviously lead to stop transactions. So, I mean, this is a part of your, if you're in the industry, this is what you live on. So you need the transactions to work. If you don't comply with this, it could actually happen that you will be cut off from the transactions connected to the credit cards. Looking at two areas that this new regulation or the updated version of this compliance is focusing on is the emphasis on security culture, which is something that obviously every organization should consider nowadays, not only to do what you have to do just because you're obligated to do so because of regulation and compliance. You also need to consider introducing some kind of culture into your organization around cybersecurity, so it becomes a day of your everyday. It becomes a part of your everyday work. Just as Rick had mentioned, now they've had security training. I mean, that needs to happen in all organizations nowadays, and not least in this industry. So it's focusing on that, but it's also focusing on more practical things like penetration testing, vulnerability management that needs to be carried out. One of the very interesting things with this one that I think is very good to notice is that everything that is connected, the scope, the assets that are connected to the payment solution that you have, even if you have a third-party payment solution, nowadays need extra attention, and you need to be doing even more to protect those systems, like you need to scan them with a specific type of approved scanning vendor, as it's called. So, and also, before I forget, what this is about. So, yes, so this is about payment, the credit card payments, right? And for you to be allowed to deal with the credit card payments. So any organization, also for this industry, that deals with credit card information, transactions, or if you store data in relation to credit card information, you need to comply with the industry compliance that is set by PCI. So And this will be fully introduced in March next year. So, and by that time, it needs to be fully implemented. That means that you need to have the processes in place in the beginning or in the end of the first quarter next year. This is a complex regulation. If you start to read it, it's easy to get lost. We're happy to tell more about how this works and how it applies to your specific organization, because it's not exactly the same for everyone. It depends on the number of transactions and other things. So it's a complex compliance that is set by PCI, but we're happy to talk more about that if you're interested. So this is definitely one of the things that you should consider. And I also would like to mention that sometimes when we talk to different organizations and companies in different industries, they look at this as some kind of punishment. But I would consider this as a very healthy way of working with cybersecurity. I would definitely look into this regulation, even if it doesn't apply specifically to your organization. I would definitely look into it because, again, it does put focus on a secure culture and governance that you should have within basically any organization today to stay well protected. So that's a little bit about PCI DSS version 4. Let's move on to the next topic. Coming back to what I just now mentioned, there's a lot of new regulations coming out, and these regulations tend to be industry specific. Sometimes they are regional, or in these two examples, they're connected to the European Union, EU, so all the member states in EU. I would just like to highlight this for a moment, because what I do think is that even if you don't fall under them, even if you're not obligated to apply or comply with them, these directives and all the regulations that are coming out, I would definitely spend some time looking into this, because it does really make sense to look at them and look at the different guidelines that comes with these directives, regulations, and compliance. And we have two here that I put on this slide, which is DORA, and that applies to the financial sector. It doesn't apply specifically to the industry in this webinar. The same goes for NIS and NIS2. That applies to everyone that provides essential services within the European Union. But I would still very much consider looking into these ones because they do point at a very healthy way of working with cybersecurity. And if you look at these regulations, and I'm pretty sure that there will be more coming out, also more specifically for more specific industries, like the industry today, you could expect there to be more. And if you look at them, there is a certain pattern behind them. Most of them are focusing on or pushing for a more systematic, risk-based approach when it comes to cybersecurity. And that sentence, the systematic, risk-based approach, is something that you will definitely hear more about in future directive regulations, compliance, other things that will be coming out. So instead of doing it afterwards, I would strongly recommend to start to look into these things already today, because then you can be prepared. Like PCI DSS version 4, that happens, obviously, we're just a few quarters away from that. And if you're doing that in the last moment, if you're trying to implement these processes, these best practices, etc., in the last moment, then obviously you will have a very hard time doing that. And then that will become a commercial risk for your organization. I would, in addition to this, I will also very much recommend to look at NIST, which is a US organization, National Institute of Standards and Technology. I need to write it down here because it's a long, tricky name. They have a lot of best practices to look into also. So I would definitely also recommend, as I recommend with any organization, to start to look at those, because they tell you how to work in a healthy way with cybersecurity in general. So that's a bit of the regulations, and also PCI DSS version 4, which I strongly recommend to consider.
But the DORA, like you told me a bit about the DORA regulation that's coming up, the Digital Operational Resilience Act. and it's for the financial industry. But in the end of the day, being a sportsbook, being a casino operator, is so similar comparing to being a bank or a financial institute, because what do? You add money to an account, you do something with that money on that bank account, on that wallet, and then you withdraw money. So yes, it applies to the financial sector, but the potential risks for a large sports betting operator is probably bigger compared to like one of those banks that everyone has in the country.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's and like Stefan is saying, like it's better to start now to really start working on this. Maybe it doesn't apply to you, but the framework is there. The framework for needs and needs too. Let's say regarding name servers, knowing, okay, our name servers are resilient, our domain registrar is resilient towards attacks, and then just start looking at all other suppliers. Like you can have the best hosting company, but if you have your domain name as one of the consumer-based registrars that I've seen so many times, okay, and then there's not the multi-factor authentication of that registrar, just some former employees still have the password to it and can change that the domain name, the ownership of the domain, and transfer the domain name out with no security at all. So it's really good to start working in this way. And if I would be like a CISO or a CTO or someone, it's like use this in your organization to show that, okay, this is something that's actually happening. This is not something I'm the only one thinking it's important. It's like the EU, the US, some US government agencies are also pushing for it. Therefore, it's something that the entire company needs to take seriously.
Well, if I could add something to that, Rickard, I mean, it's a very valid point. One interesting thing, and one of the experiences that I had throughout the years working with cybersecurity, is that if you look at different organizations, they're pretty similar. They're facing this kind of similar challenges within cybersecurity. I think it would be a wrong starting point to say that just because you're in sports betting or online casino, you would be facing other threats than other companies. And I think we will come back to some examples. You're still facing the same kind of challenges. At Home Security, we dig deep into the environments of our customers and the infrastructure that they have. And something that always hits me, and one of the experiences that I have, is that if you look at, doesn't matter if you look at an e-commerce company, or if it is sports betting and online casinos, or if it's if you're a manufacturer or you're a government organization, the threats that you're facing is very much the same. There are some differences in how you run your business, but the threats that you're facing are very, very similar. That meaning that looking at these compliance and regulations, directives, makes a lot of sense, even if it doesn't specifically apply to you, because again, it's quite similar. Anyway, the environments of threats, ransomware, phishing, DDoS attacks, as we mentioned here, cloud misconfigurations, that goes for any industry. It's all the same.
Thank you. Let's jump to the next slide. And then I think we have a few of the obvious candidates for the issues that we as an industry are seeing. And we need to mention DDoS. It is the thing that happens the most. That's probably affecting most companies throughout the industry. And like for the last 9 months, we've seen larger and larger DDoS attacks. They've been both from Akamai, from Cloudflare, a lot of these kind of reports. Okay, we stopped this amount, we stopped this. It's because it's getting bigger and bigger, just like Julia said in the beginning. So every attack, like the scale of every attack is just growing. There were one nearly 700 megapps attack last year. There were one was 70 million requests per second that happened this spring. It's just massive attacks. It's so many computers, so much that people used to push it, but still, the cost to push a DDoS attack like that is a fraction to the gain of it, because no, it's so hard to find the person that facilitates the attack. And in the end of the day, it hurts the trust of the industry. The sites will be down, but it's more the reputation and the brand. If someone tries to log into, again, a bank, that's what a lot of trying to access the wallet, but in this case, access an operator trying to access their money, because it's literally their money that they have on that wallet, and it doesn't work. The person will probably leave that site or go somewhere else that works. Like, I got the money out from it because they were down for like an hour, a day, a minute. Doesn't matter. That user saw it. So no, but it really hurts the trust, and just because of the growing scale, like what we are trying to do is work with the biggest suppliers of mitigation, and I'm always again trying to build something like this by myself. It's like trying to build a firewall software by myself or something else. It just doesn't work. It's better to buy one of the best ones that is out there. But let's continue to the next one. So we have also ransomware. I had a colleague asking me yesterday, like, Rika, what is the biggest threat, do you think, against the industry and everything? It's like, it's ransomware, because it can really take a company down to the knees, and it's so hard to do anything when it happened. You need to have the code backups. You need to have all these things around it, but it's a lot of work when it have happened. So it's so much easier to do it prior. Looking at cyber insurances, like there is a lot of, like everyone else, is working with cyber insurances. We're paying a lot of money for it, but like Julia was saying, if you lose like 150,000 an hour, that insurance won't do that good. And you can't get a cyber insurance for like $1 billion, because no one will sign that insurance, because there's no insurance company that will do it. But also on the other side, the premium for it will be crazy. And on the ransomware side, the easiest way to stop it is to work with your colleagues, work with your staff, have every month, every quarter, every year, have education about cybersecurity. Two-thirds of all ransomware attacks start with staff as the attack vector. It's just, if you solve that, you will solve two-thirds of your problems, or reduce it. If you reduce it, that's what I would focus. There was one example. I was a land-based operator just a few weeks back or months back that had an issue, and there were another like large supermarket or retail store in Sweden. They were down for a week, 2 weeks. There were like a few hundred supermarket shops. Like half of Sweden couldn't buy food because of a ransomware attack. So it is happening, and the best way to stop it is basically to work with your colleagues, try to find and educate and find ways to educate people. Let's go to the next one. So I think this is both me and Sam put together what can we do. And I think I've been saying educate people. So I will leave that over to Stefan to the first point.
Yeah, it's a very valid point, of course. I strongly recommend any organization to really go to the core. A lot of organizations, we put all these protection on top of people, all this nice armor that they have, and it's nice and shiny, but it doesn't necessarily, it does have weaknesses, even though it looks good. So you really need to go to the core, and that comes back to the cultural work that we talked about and that Rickard now touched on also. You really need to have your people be protected. You need to kind of build your own human firewall to protect against one of the biggest threats that we're facing, which is also one of the biggest threats for this industry, which is the ransomware attacks. And the way I always resonated is so go to the core, train the people rather than just putting all the shiny armor on. You need a shiny armor also, but you also need to train people. So the security culture, that's very much needed. And then, of course, you can ask the question, how would that be done in practice? How do I build my own human firewall? Well, it's a very good question because it's not an easy thing to do. What I strongly recommend, first of all, is to find out how actually weak or strong the users or the staff that you have are. And how do you find that out? Well, basically, there is a well-proven method of doing that, which is the phishing simulations that you can work with. And then, of course, you want to work with awareness training and activities like the ones that Rickard mentioned that they did today at Internet Vikings. So yes, you need to create a security culture. You need to look at these different things that we now mentioned, NIS2, DORA, other compliance that like PCI DSS version 4, and get the best out of them. That's definitely where you would start. You would also like to get all the fundamentals in place, but I think this is a quite interesting topic. At Home Security, we work with customers all over the world. We help customers everywhere from down south in Africa to the very north of the Nordics. And they all have the fundamentals in place in terms of antivirus firewalls and stuff. So, of course, you need to have that in place. But I do expect that most of you have that. There are some additional things that could be in place. Of course, web application firewalls and the DDoS attacks obviously require some protection also. And one thing that that came to my mind when you talked about this, Rickard, was that the DDoS attacks obviously need to protect yourself against the traffic itself. Makes a lot of sense, right? And for that, you need some of these robust solutions that are out there. But also, please consider that DDoS attacks is also exposing software vulnerabilities. So there are systems, and if you don't patch your systems, they're going to be even more exposed to DDoS attacks. So, I mean, one way of dealing with DDoS attacks is to keep your systems up to date. Patch your systems. I mean, that's something you need to do in combination with other protections, of course.
Yeah, that's something we missed there because patch management is one of the topics that we have it in the end. Sorry, I see it now.
Yeah, and it should be a part of the culture, I would say. I mean, that need to be an integrated process of your company and the organization when you work with cybersecurity. I see that as a part of the cultural work almost than anything else. Then maybe you, Rickard, can talk a bit about the backup and.
Yeah, absolutely. But so if we all conclude that disaster recovery and cold backup, like that ransomware is one of the largest threats, then we need to, how do we solve that if it happens? There's two ways. First of all, of course, offsite disaster recovery or a secondary system disaster recovery. The problem with disaster recovery is because they are usually meant if there's a physical disaster, tornado, hurricane, earthquake, something like that. But on the other side, if there is a ransomware attack, your disaster recovery could be as compromised as your primary environment. So usually, and what we are looking into, what we are doing is setting up like a cold backup. A cold backup that basically is pulls data from your production systems. There is no way to log in from your production system to the backup server because then there is no way for the hacker to get from the production system to the backup. It sounds very easy, but it's very rare that I actually see someone doing this in production. So that's something I would really push for. Cold backup could also be that you want to have like a tape that you take out, put it somewhere where it's safe. The issue with have a tape backup, it usually takes a very long time to recover that data and put it into production again. So just a backup server with a lot of hard drives that you can just push data to that no one can access from the production system. It's not the same password, not the same login details, not the same Active Directory, not the same X, Y, and Z. That's the best and the cheapest way to fight ransomware if it happens. Because we're talking a few $1,000s a month in that range for a big system. But the gain is very, if you pay $20,000 a month for cybersecurity insurance, it's a very, it's a much more practical way to solve your ransomware attack. Stefan.
Yeah, and obviously talking about backup and disaster recovery, these things obviously help you when something already happened, right? So it's kind of a reactive protection. And if you want to take it to the next level, which is obviously the fourth step in this one, is that you would like to introduce a more proactive approach towards cybersecurity. And again, that comes back to all the different compliance regulations, directives, etc. They're all pointing at this, the proactive approach. And then if you look at that in practice, obviously, again, with cloud, as well as you introduce a new and a very efficient technology, you also introduce a lot of new potential risks and threats. So definitely something that I would recommend to look into is cloud security posture management, specifically if you're using one of the big cloud platforms. And what that means is that you would be constantly looking for identity access network kind of risks. And as you know, you just need to have the wrong setting there, and you might expose a database, you might expose data in some ways by giving access to basically the entire internet. I mean, you could easily make that a mistake. So you introduce a new technology that is very efficient, but just as easy it is to put up a new server in AWS, for example, it is to introduce a new vulnerability or a new risk. So that's something to consider, to be proactive in that. And of course, a part of that procedure would be that in the procedure of implementing new systems in production, you would have that as one of the actions, one of the things that you would do before that happens is to make sure that you do cloud security posture management. Vulnerability management is also something that pops up in all of these directive regulations, compliance demands, and quite specifically. Why? Well, because it's one of the most efficient ways to get your proactive work started within cybersecurity, to understand where you have your risks, where you have your vulnerabilities in your basically entire infrastructure. So that's been a proven technology. It's been around for 25 years. It's definitely something that is easier to implement than a lot of other solutions out there. And it would definitely be one of the cornerstones if you want to take it to the next level and be more proactive. As we talked about, we got patch management, of course, it's a part of the culture. You don't want to become a part of these networks that attack other organizations that could actually cause you a lot of damage in other ways also. So patch management, but also patching and the routines for that is also obviously very, very important to get in place. We see a lot of challenges with this, but the industry that we're talking about now is pretty young. If we go back and if you look at the producers, the manufacturers, they have a longer history. They have been around for maybe 100, 150 years now as a company. So they build a lot of infrastructure over the years, and they have other challenges than the more modern organizations have. One of the challenges is obviously that they're not in control over all of the infrastructure they have. So they have a very hard time implementing stuff like Azure Active Directory, taking control of, understand what kind of vulnerabilities you have throughout all the different systems you have. So I guess in this industry, it's a bit more modern. You have more control over your systems. But again, that that's definitely an area where you can get a lot of help from vulnerability management, because you don't need necessarily to have an implemented structure for having access and control over all your systems and computers to be able to understand the vulnerabilities that are in them. So that's really a strength of working with these kind of systems. So I think these are pretty concrete things to do and to look into. And I would really like to emphasize that it's not something that me and Richard invented, really. If you look at all these regulations, directive compliance, what's coming from NIST, for example, you will find a lot of these terms and these products being mentioned as a part of the fundamental setup that you should work with.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's jump to the next one. And I think we now have Julia joining us back for the Q&A. I guess we had a lot of questions prior coming in here, so looking forward. Hi, Julia.
Hello. Yes, definitely. It was very informative, guys. Thank you very much. Once again, we have a few pre-submitted questions, which I'm going to begin with. And I can see the first questions from the live audience are starting to pop up. Please, guys, don't be shy. Send your questions in the chat and we will answer them shortly. We'll look forward for your questions. So the first one, what in your opinion is the biggest cybersecurity threat in the industry? I take it they refer to the online sports betting and online casino industry is currently faced with. I believe it was partially answered during the presentation.
No, but I will just add to that. Like, I would say DDoS. That's the thing we're seeing the most. That's most harm right now. Of course, ransomware is really targeting a few specific players. But look at what have happened the last 6-9 months with a lot of people have been DDoS. There were 3-4 major events the last 9 months, and that's an issue. So yeah.
Something that I would like to add to this about the DDoS attacks is that there's an interesting aspect around the DDoS attacks. You should think about it. If you look at ransomware, which is obviously also one of the big issues, let's come back to that, the phishing attacks, which could lead into ransomware attack. But one interesting aspect about the DDoS attacks is that you don't actually hack into the systems, right? You're standing on the outside of the systems. You're not in the systems, so you don't need to put efforts into trying to find a way into a system to attack them with traffic attack like DDoS attacks. So obviously, it's much easier to buy it as a service. You can easily buy it as a service. If you spend some money on it, you could basically target any site that you would like to target, and that site will be down for a certain time. You know, the more money you spend on it, the more time it will be down if they don't have a proper protection. So that's one of the aspects that, you know, there's SaaS services out there today where you can buy DDoS attacks. And so since you don't need to be in the system also, the cyber criminals can be much more anonymous, right? They don't need to really actively hack into a system. They can just stand far away and they can do this. So if you consider that, you might also understand that the DDoS attacks is going to increase. You know, if there's a product out there, you can buy it for a certain amount of money, which is not a lot of money, and you don't even need to act as a criminal in a way, right? You don't need to hack into a system or do the traditional things that would be more connected to or more related to crime. I mean, it becomes available basically for anyone to happen. So I would definitely say that you're just going to see that increase over time because it's becoming more and more accessible. The other thing, and if I would like to add another threat, it's obviously also touching on what we talked about previously now in the webinar, is the users. So the users is usually the weakest link. Basically, any organization we talk with in any industry, they all say the same. Most of the attacks, except for the DDoS attacks, start with the user making a mistake because they're exposed to phishing, other type of social engineering. And that's what I usually say. If you think about it, if you go back to your business, the business that you have, and and you think, okay, what would be the easiest way to get access to data to cause damage if we're not talking about the traffic attacks and the DDoS attacks? It's most likely manipulating someone in your staff. Picking up the phone, talking to them, have them implement something or install something, pretend to be someone. That's most likely the easiest way to get into your systems, is actually to do social engineering. Even for us being a cybersecurity company, when we do our reviews of what is the biggest current threats that we're facing, since we don't have an online operation going on in that sense, like you have guys in this industry, it's the manipulation of people and social engineering. Phishing leads to ransomware, and ransomware could definitely stop your operation for a long period of time. And then we mentioned large amounts of money that could cost. So DDoS attacks, phishing, ransomware attacks is definitely not only for this industry, but also for most of the industries out there, the current and the biggest threats. In addition to that, cloud, new technologies always comes before the security culture and the knowledge about security for a specific technology. It's always the same if you consider it. The technology comes first and then security comes afterwards. And it's the same with cloud. So if you're using cloud, that's definitely something to be very, very careful about. So that would be my addition to that question.
Thank you, Rickard. Thank you, Stefan. And before we jump to the next question, Stefan, additionally, as you said, employees are within the system, so it's sort of controllable. Are you aware of any practices, how they can safeguard from the threats imposed by the users? Are there any practices to protect?
Well, I think we mentioned a few things. I mean, how do you protect the users? Well, you need to implement some kind of security culture, because in the very end, as I mentioned before, you can have all these shiny armor, you can put it on the users, and that costs a lot of money also. But there will still be ways to manipulate the users. There will still be ways to work around those protections. So you need to work with the users, and you need to find ways to work with that. And there are different ways, of course. Security training obviously needs to be done on a regular basis. We cannot believe or think that just because we tell people one time to not click on the wrong links, to not click on, or to teach them how to verify a sender, how to verify a link, and all of these basic stuff. We cannot expect people to remember that over a certain long period of time. You need to do that as a continuous. You need to have it as a continuous process, and then it becomes a part of your everyday work. So the security culture, working with this as a continuous topic. And then, of course, my tip would be to, if you really want to find out how your users behave if they're exposed to these attacks, well, you need to simulate them. How would you otherwise find out how many of the users will do things that they are not supposed to do? Click on links, post information, post sensitive data on a website, etc. Well, you need to do simulations, obviously. So simulation and awareness training is the most obvious things that you need to work with your staff on a continuous basis. Not to forget, the continuity in this is just as important as the other things.
And I can just add to that, like I would say, having like a buff, as we all work with web-based applications, having a web application firewall like protect against SQL injections, like data retrievals from like misconfigured input fields, anything around that is important. Now there's a lot of more software and the frameworks around handling SQL injections and similar, but still, web application firewalls will reduce a lot of issues for someone to retrieve the user data. And I would also agree on what Stefan said regarding simulate and see, and maybe not only simulate, but also educate the user. Like if you log into a bank, many times it's like, please don't click on the link coming from us. We will never send you an email asking to state your login details. Same thing, send an email to your users. If you have 100, 200,000 like sports betting or casino users, send an email, state what you will do and what you won't do. And usually state, we will not do all these things that the phishing attackers will try to do.
Thank you, Rickard. Thank you, Stefan. Nice comment from Pascal. Great explanation, loud, clear, and clear, Stefan. Thank you for your kind words, Pascal. And I believe there's a comment from Boyan Boyev on your answer, guys. Educate users periodically, but this is more related to corporate security, not production side in the data centers. So against ransomware, we must think more about more reliable backup solutions of our data configuration, source code, and etc. So what can you share about backup solutions? And another question Boyan raised, WAF is also really important topic.
Yeah. No, but if we start with like on the backup solution side, like I said, have your backup completely separated, login, AD, anything connected to your production environment. So you can't go, if someone hacks your office, they hack the production environment, they cannot go to the backup system. Just try to figure, okay, how can we have 2 YubiKeys, something to be able to go into the backup servers. That's like how secure the backup environment should be from the rest of the organization. And I don't agree that educating users periodically is related to corporate security. It is the weakest link in within your staff. Like, people don't talk about it, but that's what it is. Like, the weakest link in your staff will be the entry point of the hacker. Then the hacker can be at that entry level person for months, just trying to figure out, how do I get into the other, like the more senior people with more access to the technicians? How do I do that? What kind of errors do people actually do? So yes, it is corporate security, but still it's an attack vector that needs to be protected from the start.
Thank you very much. I believe you just answered a question by Frank Grimes. What do you think increases cybersecurity risk, more internal employees or external players' activities? Frank, does that answer your question in full? Let's wait what Frank says and jump to the next one of the pre-submitted questions, please.
And I just mentioned, like, for me, running a hosting company, there is a lot of issues talking about employees being the biggest security threat. It is an issue because you don't want to mention it. Like, there is like, okay, that's a risk. And unfortunately, within cybersecurity, that's the reality, and we need to talk about it. It's not something we can just hide and say, yeah, we've put the shining armor on, it will solve our security risk. But we need to educate and talk with our colleagues around it. And remove the stigma, remove the that you can talk about it.
Thank you very much. We are in 52 minutes due. Do we have time for another question to answer?
Yes. Yeah, we can do 1 or 2 more.
Let's shoot, one final question. One of the pre-submitted ones, please. Yes. What are the key security measures that online gaming and sports betting platforms should implement to safeguard their users' data?
I think this is what we talk about.
Yes.
Having a buff, having these things should solve that question.
Perfect. Then yes, Stefan.
Well, yes, I agree with Rickard. But I think we touched on this a number of times now. Get the fundamentals in place. I expect most of the organizations from the industry that you already have that. But also look at the compliance regulations, directives, etc., and see what they suggest. But then start to also introduce a more proactive approach. Again, coming back to backup. I mean, when the shit hits the fan, so to speak, it's already too late. Of course, you need to have backups, and they also need to be protected. But you need to introduce a proactive approach. I mean, that's definitely the next step, and that's definitely something that all organizations should try to do. Otherwise, you're obviously one step behind all the time, and that's not a very good position to be in.
Thank you, Stefan. Let's have one last question and we will wrap it up. Are there any legal and regulatory considerations that are important for online gaming and sports betting platforms to adhere in terms of cybersecurity? I believe you already touched based on the EU regulations. Is there anything specific for online gaming companies?
But I can add to that, like a lot of the frameworks from like UKGC and a few other regulators is based on ISO, some of the ISO standards, especially on the info security side. You have ISO 27001. That's the base of, then they build a regulation on top of it and handle it towards the industry. So I would say the ISO 27001, of course. Again, PCI DSS, it's you just need to have it, otherwise you can't do credit card transactions. It's pretty similar, pretty easy. But also on the, like you have SOC 2 framework, like there's Cloud Security Alliance, there's a lot of them, like these kind of standards to show that, okay, we are doing something with this, like we're actually working with it, we're every day try to improve it. So I would say SOC 2, if I need to mention two, it is SOC 2 or ISO 27001. That's two.
If I could add something to that.
Sure.
We haven't talked that much about GDPR today.
Because everyone else just talks about it all the time.
Yeah, because everyone else talks a lot about it, and you've heard about it since way before 2018 in May when it was introduced. So, but obviously, being in this industry, you deal a lot with the personal data, and obviously you need to also consider your relation to GDPR, and you have seen maybe you've seen all the big fines that has been that you've seen out there, targeting companies like Facebook, etc. Huge amounts of money, could be very, very costly, since you're dealing with a lot of personal data and also from a lot of aspects sensitive personal data. It's not only a name and a login, which is sometimes this is also much more sensitive and from different perspectives. So that's definitely something to consider, to get the processes in place to follow that and to be compliant with GDPR, and also to consider that it doesn't matter if you're a country, a EU member country, or EU member state. Obviously, GDPR was eventually, or is originally, a European directive. You should consider that if you have customers in Europe, it still applies to you. So that's definitely something that you need to consider. And with that in mind, obviously, you also need to work with cybersecurity.
Thank you very much, Rickard. Thank you very much, Stefan. I believe we will wrap it up here. It was nearly an hour, just to keep it not too long and not too boring. A lot of thank yous pouring from Dan and Pascal. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much to our speakers, Stefan and Rickard, for joining us today, for your time and sharing your expertise. It was very insightful, and I'm sure people will have a lot of takeaways.
Thank you, too.
There were a lot of questions regarding whether we'll be sharing presentation and whether the webinar is recorded. Yes, it is recorded indeed. We will post it on our YouTube channel, and it will also be available on our Internet Vikings website. And we will send the presentation to everybody via the email, whoever attended the webinar, whoever was registered for the webinar. And in case you have any unanswered questions, we will also leave Rickard's and Stefan's contact so that you can reach out directly to them and find out all the information that you need from them. Rickard, Stefan, thank you very much once again. Have a great day.
Thank you.
I hope to have you very soon for another interesting webinar. Thank you, everybody, and I will see you next time.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you, Julia. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.